different. But it seems the crisis is averted. I'm gonna open something up real quick just for my own personal sense of well minds. I don't know. We're here. I'm alive. I'm gonna read Good Omens today, and I am pumped. It's gonna be so fun. Alright. Here we go. Open up Streamlabs again. Here we are. Have my coffee, which I have greatly watered down, due to the fact that I should not be drinking coffee, but ooh, it sings to my ulcerative colitis-ridden heart, so I can't not. Let's go look at the stream with puppy dog eyes so no one judges me. It's like if someone has lactose intolerance and they drink milk, you know? So I just want to drink coffee. Nobody judge me. And so lately, I've been wanting to make a habit of reading the actual forewords to these things. And I know it isn't directly the story, but I think that, reading the foreword can really offer a lot of insight into, the mind of the author. Even though, as an English major, I will say we believe in death of the author. We believe in analysis beyond the author's intent because, sometimes authors were complete and utter wingbats, pieces of shit. But it doesn't hurt to read the foreword because, it's added with the text. It can be considered part of the text. And so with that, let's read the foreword of Good Omens. This one written by Neil Gaiman. It's only a page and a half, so don't worry, not too long. Foreword. People say, what was it like writing Good Omens? And we say, we were just a couple of guys, okay? We still are. It was a summer job, and we had a great time doing it. We split the money in half, and we swore to never do it again. We didn't think it was that important. And in a way, it still isn't. Good Omens was written by two people who at the time were not at all well known except by people who already knew them. They weren't even certain it would sell. They certainly didn't know that they were going to write the most repaired book in the world. And believe us, we have signed a delightfully large number of paperbacks that have been dropped in the bath, gone a worrying brown color, got repaired with sticky tape and string, and in one case consisted entirely of loose pages in a plastic bag. On the other hand, there was a guy who had a special box made of walnut and silver filigree, with paperback nestling inside on black velvet. There were silver runes on the lid. We didn't ask. Etiquette tip. It's okay, more or less, to ask an author to sign your arm. But it's not good manners to then nip around the corner to the tattoo parlor next door and then return a half hour later to show them the inflamed result. We didn't know we'd do some signing tours that would be weird even by our generous standards. Talking about humor in 15-second bursts between news flashes about the horrific hostage situation down at the local Burger King. Being interviewed by ill-prepared New York radio presenter who hadn't got the message that Good Omens was a work of what we in the trade call fiction. And getting a stern pre-interview warning about swearing in front of the diminutive director of protocol of a public service radio station because you English use bad language all the time. In fact, neither of us swear much, especially not on the radio, but for the next hour we found ourselves automatically speaking in very short, carefully scanned sentences, while avoiding each other's eyes. And then there were the readers. God bless them. We must have signed hundreds of thousands of copies for them by now. The books are often well read to the point of physical disintegration. We run across a shiny new copy, it's usually because the owner's previous 5 have been stolen by friends, struck by lightning, or eaten by giant termites in Sumatra. You have been warned. Oh, and we understand there's a copy in the Vatican Library. It'd be nice to think so. It's been fun, and it continues. That was the foreword. As I said, it's just interesting to, get the author's perspective. And this perspective, at first I thought it was Gaiman, but it could be either of them. It could be both of them. They said we. Yeah, it's probably both of them. But, yeah, so they were a couple of guys who just wrote this book, and they didn't expect it to get as big as it did. And I feel like a lot of the best gems end up that way, not set out to be an amazing, bestseller right off the bat. But yeah, my copy is not torn up because I have not read through the whole thing yet. I've only read the first couple chapters, and that was like a year and a half ago. So let's just start from the beginning. Good Omens. Chapter 1, I suppose. I looked through, there aren't really chapter markers, just kind of like these black pages. And so this says, in the beginning. Chapter in the beginning. It was a nice day. All the days had been nice. There had been rather more than 7 of them so far. Rain hadn't been invented yet. But clouds massing east of Eden suggested that the first thunderstorm was on its way. It was going to be a big one. The angel at the eastern gate put his wings over his head to shield himself from the first drops. "I'm sorry," he said politely. "What was it you were saying?" "I said that one went down like a lead balloon," said the serpent. "Oh, yes," said the angel, whose name was Aziraphale. "I think it was a bit of an overreaction, to be honest," said the serpent. "I mean, first offense and everything. I can't see what's so bad about knowing the difference between good and evil, anyways." "It must be bad," reasoned Aziraphale, and in the slightly concerned tones of one who can't see it either and is worrying about it. "Obviously, you wouldn't have been involved." "They just said, 'Get up there and make some trouble,'" said the serpent, whose name was Crawley. Although he was thinking of changing it now. Crawley, he decided, was not him. "Yes, but you're a demon. I'm not sure if it's actually possible for you to do good," said Aziraphale. "It's down to your basic, nature. Nothing personal to you, you understand." You've got to admit it's a bit of a pantomime, though," said Crawley. "I mean, pointing out the tree and saying, 'Don't touch' in big letters. Not very subtle, is it? I mean, why not put it on top of a high mountain or a long way off? Makes you wonder what he's really planning." "Best not to speculate, really," said Aziraphale. "You can't second-guess ineffability, I always say. There's a right, and there's a wrong. If you do wrong when you're told to do right, you deserve to be punished. They sat in an embarrassed silence, watching the raindrops bruise the first flowers. Eventually, Crawley said, "Didn't you have a flaming sword?" Said the angel. A guilty expression passed across his face and then came back and camped there. "You did, didn't you?" said Crawley. "It flamed like anything." Well, it looked very impressive, I thought." "Yeah, but, well, lost it, have you?" Oh, no, not exactly lost. More, well, Aziraphale looked wretched. "If you must know," he said, a trifle testily, "I gave it away." Crawley stared up at him. "Well, I had to," said the angel, rubbing his hands distractedly. "They looked so cold, poor things, and she's expecting already. And with the vicious animals out there and the storm coming up, I thought, well, where's the harm? So I just said, look, if you come back, there's going to be an almighty row. You might be needing the sword. So here it is. Don't bother to thank me. Just do everyone a big favor and don't let the sun go down on you here." Yeah. He gave Crawley a worried grin. "That was the best course, wasn't it?" "I'm not sure it's actually possible for you to do evil," said Crawley sarcastically. Aziraphale didn't notice the tone. "Oh, I do hope so," he said. "I really do hope so. It's been worrying me all afternoon." They watched the rain for a while. "Funny thing is," said Crawley, "I keep wondering whether the apple thing isn't really the right thing to do, as well. A demon can get into real trouble doing the right thing." He nudged the angel. "Funny if we both got it wrong, eh? Funny if I did the good thing and you did the bad one?" "Not really," said Aziraphale. Crawley looked up at the rain. "No," he said, sobering up. "I suppose not." Slate-black curtains tumbled over Eden. Thunder growled among the hills. The animals, freshly named, cowered from the storm. Far away in the dripping woods, something bright and fiery flickered among the trees. It was going to be a dark and stormy night. All right, so that first like little chapterette, I'd say like a prologue, is pretty short. But it introduces us to our main characters, Crawley, who becomes Crowley, and Aziraphale, which I think that's how you pronounce it. Quick disclaimer: I have not watched the Amazon show. I didn't want to watch it until after I finished the book. And then here we come with a very much like a play you would read. They list all of the characters. So, Good Omens. A narrative of certain events occurring in the last 11 years of human history, in strict accordance as shall be shown with the nice and accurate prophecies of Agnes Nutter, compiled and edited with footnotes of an educational nature and precepts for the wise by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. Dramatis Personae. Supernatural beings. God. Metatron, the voice of God. Aziraphale, an angel and part-time rare book dealer. Satan, a fallen angel, the adversary. Beelzebub, a likewise fallen angel and prince of hell. Hastur, a fallen angel and duke of hell. Liger, likewise a fallen angel and duke of hell. Crowley, an angel who did not so much as fall as saunter vaguely downwards. The apocalyptic horse persons. Death. War. Famine. Pollution. And then the humans. We have Thou Shalt Not Commit Adultery, Pulsifer, a witchfinder. We have Agnes Nutter, a prophetess. We have Newton Pulsifer, wages clerk and witchfinder private. We have Anathema Device, practical occultist and professional descendant. We have Shadwell, witchfinder sergeant. We have Madame Tracy, painted Jezebel, mornings only, and Thursdays by appointment, and medium. We have Sister Mary Loquacious, a satanic nun of the Chattering Order of St. Beryl. We have Mr. Young, a father. We have Mr. Tyler, a chairman of a residents' association. A delivery man. Them. We have Adam, an antichrist. We have Pepper, a girl. Wensleydale, a boy. Brian, a boy. Full chorus of Tibetans, aliens, Americans, Atlanteans, and other rare and strange creatures of the last days. And dog, satanic hellhound, and cat warrior, which I love that they added dog. So, there's so many different layers I could talk about here. So first of all, at the beginning, they talk about how this is, certain events absolutely happened. It was in accordance with this book written by this prophetess, just put together by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett, which is also very funny, very meta of them to insert themselves as they're the ones putting together this accurate account. And then they list everybody as if this is a play, the world's a stage sort of thing. But let's not dwell on that. Let's continue on with the next chapter, which I will mark. I have to go here and go to my properties and switch the chapter, because no longer are we in the beginning, but I don't know if you can read that, 11 years ago. There's a different time reference. Granted, 11 years ago now means a lot different than 11 years ago then, but I think it's fine. 11. Did I not get the book? Years ago. Ago. Done. Alright, here we are. Here we are, 11 years ago. Current theories on the creation of the universe state that, if it was created at all, it didn't just start. As it were, unofficially, it came into being between 10 and 20,000 million years ago. By the same token, the Earth itself is generally supposed to be about 4,500 million years old. These dates are incorrect. Medieval Jewish scholars put the date on the creation at 3,760 BC. Greek Orthodox theologians put creation as far back as 5,508 BC. These suggestions are also incorrect. Archbishop James Ussher, 1580 to 1656, published Annales Veterius et Novi Testamenti in 1654, which suggested that the heaven and the earth were created in 4004 BC. One of his asides took the calculation further, was able to announce triumphantly that the earth was created on Sunday the 21st of October 4040 BC at exactly 9 a.m. because God liked to get work done early in the morning while he was feeling fresh. This too was incorrect, by almost a quarter of an hour. The whole business with the fossilized dinosaur skeletons was a joke the paleontologists haven't seen yet. This proves two things. Firstly, that God moves in extremely mysterious, not to say circuitous ways. God does not play dice with the universe. He plays an ineffable game of his own devising, which might be compared, for the perspective of any of the other players, to being involved in an obscure, complex version of poker in a pitch-dark room with blank cards for infinite stakes, with a dealer who won't tell you the rules, who just smiles all the time. Secondly, the Earth's a Libra. The astrological prediction for Libra is your stars today. In the Your Stars Today column in the Tadfield Advertiser, on this day, this history begins as follows. Libra, September 24th to October 23rd. You may be feeling run down and always in the same old daily round. Home and family matters are highlighted and are hanging fire. Avoid unnecessary risks. A friend is important to you. Shelve major decisions until a way ahead seems clear. You may be vulnerable to a stomach upset today, so avoid salads. Help could come from an unexpected quarter. This was perfectly correct on every account except for the bit about salads. It wasn't a dark and stormy night. It should have been, but that's the weather for you. For every mad scientist who has had a convenient thunderstorm on just the night his great work was finished, and lying on the slab, there have been dozens who have sat around aimlessly under the peaceful stars while Igor clocks up the overtime. But don't let the fog, which rain later, temperatures dropping to around 45 degrees, give anyone a false sense of security. Just because it's a mild night doesn't mean that dark forces aren't abroad. They're abroad all the time. They're everywhere. They always were. That's the whole point. Two of them lurked in the ruined graveyard, two shadowy figures, one hunched and squat, the other lean and menacing. Both of them Olympic-grade lurkers. If Bruce Springsteen had ever recorded Born to Lurk, these two would have been on the album cover. They had been lurking in the fog for an hour now, but they had been pacing themselves and could lurk for the rest of the night if necessary, with still enough sullen menace left for a final burst of lurking around at dawn. Finally, after another 20 minutes, one of them said, "Bugger this for a lark. He should have been here hours ago." The speaker's name was Hastur. He was a Duke of Hell. Now I'm going to take a sip because there's a break. Many phenomena, wars, plagues, sudden audits, have been advanced as evidence for the hidden hand of Satan in the affairs of man. But wherever students of demonology get together in the M25 London Orbital Motorway is generally agreed to be among the top contenders for Exhibit A. Where they go wrong, of course, is in assuming that the wretched road is evil simply because the incredible carnage and frustration it engenders every day. In fact, very few people on the face of the planet know that the very shape of the M25 forms the sigil Odegra in the language of the black priesthood of ancient Mu, and it means, "Hail the great beast, devourer of worlds." The thousands of motorists who daily fume their way around its serpentine lengths have had the same effect as water on a prayer wheel, grinding out an endless fog of low-grade evil to pollute the metaphysical atmosphere for scores of miles around. It was one of Crowley's better achievements. It had taken years to achieve, and had involved 3 computer hacks, 2 break-ins, 1 minor bribery, and 1 wet night in the when all else had failed. 2 hours in a squelchy field, shifting the marker pegs a few, but occultly incredible significant meters. When Crowley had watched the first 30-mile-long tailback, he experienced the lovely warm feeling of a bad job well done. It had earned him commendation. Crowley was currently doing 110 miles per hour somewhere east of Slough. Nothing about him looked particularly demonic, at least by classical standards. No horns, no wings. Admittedly, he was listening to the Best of Queen tape, but no conclusions could be drawn from this because all tapes left in the car for more than about a fortnight metamorphs into Best of Queen albums. No particularly demonic thoughts were going through his head. In fact, he was currently wondering vaguely who Moe and Chandon were. Crowley had dark hair and good cheekbones. He was wearing snakeskin shoes, or at least presumably he was wearing shoes, and he could do really weird things with his tongue. And when he forgot himself, he had a tendency to hiss. He also didn't blink very much. The car he was driving was a 1926 black Bentley, one owner from new, and the owner had been Crowley. He'd looked after it. He looked after it. The reason he was late was that he was enjoying the 20th century immensely. It was much better than the 17th, and a lot better than the 14th. One of the nice things about time, Crowley always said, was that it was steadily taking him further away from the 14th century. The most bloody boring years on God's, excuse his French, earth. The 20th century was anything but boring. In fact, a flashing blue light in his rearview mirror had been telling Crowley for the last 50 seconds that he was being followed by two men who would like to make it even more interesting for him. He glanced at his watch, which was designed for the kind of rich deep-sea diver who likes to know what time it is, 21 world capitals while he's down there. Note. It was custom-made for Crowley. Getting just one chip custom-made is extremely expensive, but he could afford it. This watch gave time in 20 world capitals and in a capital city in another place, which it was always one time, and that was too late. Returning. The Bentley thundered up the exit ramp, took the corner on two wheels, and plunged down a leafy road. The blue light followed. Crowley sighed and took one hand from the wheel, half turning, and made a complicated gesture over his shoulder. Flashing light dimmed to the distance as police car rolled to a halt, much to the amazement of its occupants. But it would be nothing to the amazement they experienced when they opened up the hood and found out that what the engine had turned into. In the graveyard, Hastur, the tall demon, passed a dog end, back to Liger, the shorter one, the more accomplished lurker. I can see a light, he says. Here he comes now, the flash bastard. What's that he's driving, said Liger. It's a car. A horseless carriage, explained Hastur. I expected they didn't have them last time you were here. Not for what you might call general use. They had a man up front with a red flag, said Liger. They've come on a bit since then, I reckon. What's this Crowley like, said Liger. Hastur spat. He's been up here too long, he said. Right from the start. Gone native, if you ask me. Drives a car with a telephone in it. Liger pondered this. Like most demons, he had a very limited grasp of technology, and so he was just about to say something like, I bet it needs a lot of wire, when the Bentley rolled to a halt at the cemetery gate. And he wears sunglasses, sneered Hastur. Even when he don't need to. He raised his voice. All hail Satan, he said. All hail Satan, Liger echoed. Hi, said Crowley, giving him a little wave. Sorry I'm late, but you know how it is on the A40 at Denham, and when I try to cut up towards Chorley Wood, and then... Now we art all here, said Hastur meaningfully. We must recount the deeds of the day. Yeah, deeds, said Crowley, with a slightly guilty look of one who is attending church for the first time in years and has forgotten which bits you stand up for. Hastur cleared his throat. I have tempted a priest, he said. When he walked down the street and saw the pretty girls in the sun, I put doubt into his mind. He would have been a saint, but within a decade we shall have him. Nice one, said Crowley helpfully. Hi, Pendrak. Ooh, you're a big fan of both Pratchett and Gaiman. Yeah. Actually, so I didn't get to read Good Omens in college, but I actually did get to read a good deal of The Sandman, which is one of Gaiman's like really, really, really long graphic novels. Anyways, I was in the middle. I'll get back to that. Oh yeah, he tempted a politician. That's the next thing. Where was I? Aha. I have corrupted a politician, said Leaguer. I let him think a tiny bribe would not hurt. Within a year, we shall have him. They both looked expectantly at Crowley, who gave them a big smile. Oh, you'll like this, he said. His smile became even wider and more conspiratorial. I tied up every portable telephone system in central London for 45 minutes at lunchtime, he said. There was a silence, except for a distant swishing of cars. Yes, said Haster. And then what? Look, it wasn't easy, said Crowley. Like, that's all? Said Leaguer. Look, people. And exactly what has that done to secure souls for our master? Said Haster. Crowley pulled himself together. What could he tell them? That 20,000 people got bloody furious? That you could hear the arteries clanging shut across the city? And that then they went back and took it all out on their secretaries or traffic wardens or whatever, and they took it out on other people in all kinds of vindictive little ways, which, here was a good bit, they thought up themselves. For the rest of the day, the pass-along effects were incalculable. Thousands and thousands of souls got a faint patina of tarnish, and you hardly had to lift a finger. We couldn't tell that to demons like Haster and Leaguer. 14th century minds, the lot of them, spending years picking away at one soul. Admittedly, it was craftsmanship, but you had to think differently these days. Not big, but wide. With 5 billion people in the world, you couldn't pick the buggers off one by one anymore. You had to spread your efforts. But demons like Liger and Haster wouldn't understand. They'd never have thought up the Welsh language television, for example, or value-added tax, or Manchester. He'd been particularly pleased with Manchester. The powers that be seem to be satisfied, he said. Times are changing. So what's up? Haster reached down behind a tombstone. This is, he said. Crowley stared at the basket. Oh, he said. No. Yes, said Haster, grinning. Already? Yes. And, it's up to me? Yes, Haster was enjoying this. Well, why me? Said Crowley, desperately. You know me, Haster. Isn't it, my scene? Oh, it is, said Haster. Your scene. Your starring role. Take it. Times are changing. Yeah, said Lager, grinning. They're coming to an end, for a start. Why me? You are obviously highly favored, said Haster, maliciously. I imagined Liger here would give his right arm for a chance like this. That's right, said Liger. Someone's right arm, anyway, he thought. There was plenty of right arms about, no sense in wasting a good one. Haster produced a clipboard from a grubby recesses of his Mac. Sign here, he said, leaving a terrible pause between the words. Crowley fumbled vaguely at an inside pocket and produced a pen. It was sleek and matte black. It looked as though it could exceed the speed limit. It's a nice pen, said Liger. Can write underwater, Crowley muttered. Whatever will they think of next, mused Liger. Whatever it is, they better think of it quickly, said Haster. No, not A.J. Crowley, your real name. Crowley nodded mournfully and drew a complex, wiggly sigil on the paper. It glowed redly in the gloom, just for a moment, and then faded. What am I supposed to do with it? He said. You will receive instructions, Haster scowled. Why so worried, Crowley? The moment we have been working for all these centuries is at hand. Yeah, right, said Crowley. He did not look now like the lithe figure that had sprung so lithely from the Bentley a few minutes ago. He had a hunted expression. Our moment of eternal triumph awaits. Eternal, yeah, said Crowley. And you will be a tool of that glorious destiny. Tool, yeah, muttered Crowley. He picked up the basket as if it might explode, which, in a manner of speaking, it would shortly do. Okay, he said. I will be off then, shall I? Get it over with. Not that I want to get it over with, he added hurriedly, aware of things that could happen if Hastur turned in an unfavorable report. But you know me. Keen. The senior demons did not speak. So I'll be popping along, Crowley babbled. See you guys, see you. Great. Fine. Ciao. As the Bentley skidded off in the darkness, Liger said, What's that mean? It's Italian, said Hastur. Think it means food. Funny thing to say, then. Liger stared at the retreating taillights. You trust him? He said. No, said Hastur. Right, said Liger. It'd be a funny old world, he reflected, if demons went around trusting one another. Ugh. The, fan is blowing my hair, and it's, tickling my nose. It's driving me crazy. I guess you can't see, the mini hairs, but yeah, it's driving me up a wall. Crowley, somewhere, went west of Amersham, hurtled through the night, snatched a back tape at random and tried to wrestle it out of its brittle plastic box, while staying on the road. The glare of a headlight proclaimed it would be Vivaldi's Four Seasons. Soothing music. That's what he needed. He rammed it into the Blaupunkt. Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, why now, why me? He muttered as the familiar strains of Queen washed over him. And suddenly, Freddie Mercury was speaking to him. Because you've earned it, Crowley. Crowley blessed under his breath. Using electronics as a means of communication has been his idea, and Below had, for once, taken it up. And, as usual, got it dead wrong. He hoped they could be persuaded to subscribe to Cellnet, but instead they just cut into whatever it happened to be that he was listening to at the time and twisted it. Crowley gulped. Thank you very much, Lord, he said. We have great faith in you, Crowley. Thank you, Lord. This is important, Crowley. I know. This is the big one, Crowley. Leave it to me, Lord. This is what we are doing, Crowley, and if it goes wrong, then those involved will suffer greatly. Even you, Crowley. Especially you. Understood, Lord. Here are your instructions, Crowley. And suddenly he knew. He hated that. They could just as easily have told him. They didn't have to drop a chilly knowledge straight into his brain. He had to drive to a certain hospital. I'll be there in 5 minutes, Lord. No problem. Good. I see a little silhouette of a man. Scaramouche, will you do the fandango? Crowley thumped the wheel. Everything had been going so well. He had it really under his thumb these few centuries. That's how it goes. You think you're on top of the world, and then suddenly they spring Armageddon on you. The Great War, the last battle, heaven versus hell, 3 rounds, 1 fall, no submission. And that'd be that. No more world. That's what the end of the world meant. No more world. Just endless heaven, or depending on who won, endless hell. Crowley didn't know which one was worse. Well, hell was worse, of course, by definition. But Crowley remembered what heaven was like. It had quite a few things in common with hell. You couldn't get a decent drink in either of them, for a start. And the boredom you got in heaven was almost as bad as the excitement you got in hell. There was no getting out of it. You couldn't be a demon and have free will. I will not let you go. Will not let you go. Let him go. It's still the song. Well, at least it wouldn't be this year. He'd have time to do things. Unload long-term stocks for a start. He wondered what would happen if he just stopped the car here on this damp and dark and empty road, and took the basket and swung it round and round and let go and... Something dreadful, that's what. He'd been an angel once. He hadn't meant to fall. He just hung around with the wrong people. The Bentley plunged on through darkness, its fuel gauge pointing to 0. It had pointed to 0 for more than 60 years now. It wasn't all bad being a demon. He didn't have to buy petrol, for one thing. The only time Crowley had bought petrol was once in 1967 to get the free James Bond bullet hole in the windscreen transfers, which he had rather fancied at the time. On the back seat was the thing in the basket. The thing in the basket began to cry, the ear siren wail of the newly born, high, worldless, and old. Oof. Oh, spilled some coffee on me. It's fine. It's like the sleeve of my shorts. What would you call that? I don't know. This is a one piece. I'm wearing a romper because rompers are fun. It was quite a nice hospital, thought Mr. Young. It would have been quiet too if it wasn't for the nuns. He quite liked nuns, not that he was, left-footer or anything like that. No, when it came to avoiding going to church, the church he stolidly avoided going to was St. Cecil and All Angels, no nonsense C of E, and he wouldn't have dreamed of avoiding going to any other. All the others had the wrong smell. Floor polish for the low, somewhat suspicious incense for the high. Deep in the leather armchair of his soul, Mr. Young knew that God was embarrassed of that sort of thing. But he liked seeing nuns around at the same time he liked seeing the Salvation Army. It made you feel that it was all right, and that people were keeping the world on its axis. This was his first experience of the chatting order of St. Beryl, however. And then there's a footnote. St. Beryl Articulatus of Krakow, reputed for having been martyred in the middle of the 5th century, according to legend, Beryl was a young woman who had betrothed against her will to a pagan, Prince Casimir. On their wedding night, she prayed to the Lord to intercede, vaguely expecting a miraculous beard to appear, and she had in fact already laid in a small ivory-handled razor, suitable for ladies, against this very eventuality. Instead, the Lord granted Beryl the miraculously ability to chatter continually about whatever was on her mind, however inconsequential, without pause for breath or food. According to one version of the legend, Beryl was strangled by Prince Casimir 3 weeks after the wedding, with their marriage still unconsummated. She died a virgin and a martyr, chattering to the end. According to another version of the legend, Casimir bought himself a set of earplugs, and she died in bed with him at the age of 62. Chattering Order of St. Beryl is under a vow to emulate St. Beryl at all times, except on Tuesday afternoons for a half hour where the nuns are permitted to shut up and, if they wish, play table tennis. Continuing. Derrida had run across them while being involved with one of her great causes. Is that how you pronounce that? Deirdre? I feel like I've heard that. Deirdre. Is that the name? I said Derrida, but I'm pretty sure that's just a fucking philosopher. I'm sorry. This is embarrassing. Anyway, ran across them while being involved with one of her causes. Possibly one involving lots of unpleasant South Americans fighting other unpleasant South Americans, and the priests egging them on instead of getting on with proper priestly concerns, like organizing the church cleaning rota. The point was, nuns should be quiet, and they were right shape for it, like those pointy things you got in those chambers Mr. Young was vaguely aware of. Oh my god. Let's start from the beginning. They were the right shape for it, like those pointy things you got in chambers Mr. Young was vaguely aware your hi-fi got tested in. They shouldn't be, chattering all the time. He filled his pipe with tobacco. Well, they called it tobacco. It wasn't what he thought of as tobacco. It wasn't the tobacco you used to get. And wondered reflectively what would happen if you asked a nun where the gents was. Probably the Pope sent you a sharp note or something. He shifted his position awkwardly and glanced at his watch. One thing, though, at least the nuns had put their foot down about him being present at the birth. Deirdre had been all for it. She'd been reading things again. One kid already, and suddenly she's declaring that this confinement was going to be the most joyous and sharing experience 2 human beings could have. That's what came of letting her order her own newspapers. Mr. Young distrusted papers whose inner pages had names like Lifestyle or Options. Well, he hadn't got anything against joyous sharing experiences. Joyous sharing experiences were fine by him. The world probably needed more joyous sharing experiences, but he had made it abundantly clear that this was one joyous sharing experience Deidre could have had by herself. And the nuns had agreed. They saw no reason for the father to be involved in the proceedings. When you thought about it, Mr. Young mused, they probably saw no reason why the father should be involved anywhere. He finished thumbing the so-called tobacco into the pipe and glared at the little sign on the wall of the waiting room that said that for his own comfort he would not smoke. For his own comfort, he decided he'd go and stand in the porch. If there was a discreet shrubbery for his own comfort out there, so much the better. He wandered down the empty corridors and found a doorway that led out into a rain-swept courtyard full of righteous dustbins. He shivered and cupped his hands to light his pipe. It happened to them at a certain age, wives. 25 blameless years, and then suddenly they're going off and doing these robotic exercises in pink socks with the feet cut out, and they start blaming you for never having had to work for a living. It was hormones or something. A large black car skidded to a halt by the dustbins. A young man in dark glasses leaped out into the drizzle, holding what looked like a carry cot, snaked towards the entrance. Mr. Young took his pipe out of his mouth. "You've left your lights on," he said helpfully. The man gave him a blank look of someone whom lights are the least of his worries, and waved a hand vaguely towards the Bentley. The lights went out. "That's handy," said Mr. Young. "Infrared, is it?" He was mildly surprised to see that the man did not appear to be wet, and the carry cot appeared to be occupied. "Hasn't started yet," said the man. Mr. Young felt vaguely proud to be so instantly recognizable as a parent. "Yes," he said. "They made me go out," he added thankfully. "Already? Any idea on how long we've got?" Mr. Young noted, obviously a doctor with views about co-parenting. "I think we were getting on with it," said Mr. Young. "What room is she in?" said the man hurriedly. "We're in room 3, said Mr. Young, and patted his pockets and found the battered packet which, in accord with tradition, had been left with him. "Would we care to share a joyous cigar experience?" he said, but the man had gone. Mr. Young carefully replaced the packet and looked reflectively at his pipe. Always in a rush, these doctors, working all hours God sent. Alright, I'm going to take a drink of water, because I actually also have water. Oh, I just have it down here. It's waiting for it to melt a little bit. So it's like ice, but the ice is melting. No judgments. For my super wet water bottle. Ooh, condensation. Water's good for me, though. There's a trick they do with 1 pea in 3 cups, which is very hard to follow, and something like it for greater stakes than a handful of loose change is about to take place. The text will be slowed down to allow the sleight of hand to be followed. Miss Deidre Young is giving birth in a delivery room 3. In delivery room 3, she's having a golden-haired male baby that we will call Baby A. The wife of the American Cultural Attaché, Miss Harriet Dowling, is giving birth in delivery room 4. She is having a golden-haired male baby we will call Baby B. Sister Mary Loquacious has been devout saintess since birth. She went to Sabbath school as a child and won black stars for handwriting and liver. When she was told to join the Chattering Order, she went obediently, and having a natural talent in that direction, and, in any case, knowing that she would be among friends, she would be quite bright, and if she ever put in a position to find out, she would be quite bright if she was ever put in a position to find out, but long ago found that being scatterbrained, as she put it, gave you an easier journey through life. Suddenly she is handed a golden-haired male baby we will call the adversary, destroyer of kings, angel of the bottomless pit, great beast that is called dragon, prince of this world, father of lies, spawn of Satan, and lord of darkness. Watch carefully. Round and round they go. "Is that him?" said Sister Mary, staring at the baby. "Only I expected funny eyes, red or green, or teensy-weensy little hook fins. Hoofikins. Oh, she's like little hooves. Hoofikins, or a whittle tail." She turned him around as she spoke. No horns either. The devil's child looked ominously normal. Yeah, that's him, said Crowley. Fancy me holding the Antichrist, said Sister Mary, and bathing the Antichrist, and counting his little posy woesies. She was now addressing the child directly, lost in some world of their own. Crowley waved a hand in front of her wimple. Hello? Hello, Sister Mary? Sorry, sir. He is a little sweetheart, though. Does he look like his daddy? I bet he does. Does he look like his daddy Wattykins? No, said Crowley firmly. And now I should get up to the delivery room if I were you. Will he remember me when he grows up, do you think? Said Sister Mary wistfully, sidling slowly down the corridor. Pray that he doesn't, said Crowley, and fled. Sister Mary headed through the nighttime hospital with the adversary, destroyer kings, angel of the bottomless pit, the great beast that is called Dragon, prince of this world, father of lies, spawn of Satan, and lord of darkness, safely in her arms. She found a bassinet and laid him down safely in it. He gurgled. She gave him a tickle. A matronly head appeared around the door. It said, Sister Mary, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be on duty in room 4? Master Crowley said, just glide along. That's a good nun. Have you seen the husband anywhere? He's not in the waiting room. I've only seen Master Crowley, and he told me. I'm sure he did, said Sister Grace Voluble firmly. I suppose I better go look for the wretched man. Come in and keep an eye on her, will you? She's a bit woozy, but the baby's fine. Sister Grace paused. Why are you winking? Is there something wrong with your eye? Oh my god. Ha. Yeah, ha. Well, sometimes you have to cough. So I will do what I wish. Where was I? Also, sorry I'm a little neglectful with the chat. I'm just really into this. This is exciting. Up here. Okay. Why are you winking? Is there something wrong with your eye? You know, Sister Mary hissed archly. The babies, the exchange? Of course, in good time. But we can't have the father wandering around, can we? But, said Sister Grace, no telling what he might see. So just wait here and mind the baby. That's a dear. She sailed off down the polished corridor. Sister Mary, wheeling her bassinet, entered the delivery room. Miss Young was more than woozy. She was fast asleep, and with the look of determined self-satisfaction of someone who knows that other people are going to have to do the running around for once. Sorry, that's not okay. This is a stream for reading and fun, and I don't accept that. Sorry. I'm gonna have to ban you. Yeah. Well, that's fine. Sometimes you have to ban people. That's just the way the world is. Alright, on with the reading. Where was I? Sorry. Let's see, so Mrs. Young was more than woozy. She was fast asleep, with the look of determined self-satisfaction of someone who knows that other people are going to have to do the running around for once. Baby A was asleep beside her, weighed and name-tagged. Sister Mary, who had been brought up to be hopeful, removed the name tag, copied it out, and attached the duplicate to the baby in her care. The babies looked similar, both being small, blotchy, and looking sort of, though not really like Winston Churchill. Now, thought Sister Mary, I could do with a nice cup of tea. Most of the members of the convent were old-fashioned Satanists, like their parents and grandparents before them. They'd been brought up to it and weren't, when you got right down to it, particularly evil. Human beings mostly aren't. They just get carried away by new ideas, like dressing up in jackboots and shooting people, or dressing up in white sheets and lynching people, and dressing up in tie-dye jeans and playing guitars at people. Offer people a new creed with a costume, and their hearts and minds will follow. Anyways, being brought up as a Satanist tended to take the edge off of it. It was something you did on Saturday nights. And the rest of the time you simply got on with life as best as you could, just like everyone else. Besides, Sister Mary was a nurse, and nurses, whatever the creed, are primarily nurses, which had a lot to do with wearing your watch upside down, keeping calm in emergencies, and dying for a cup of tea. She hoped someone would come soon. She'd done the important bit, now she wanted her tea. It may help to understand human affairs to be clear that most of the great triumphs and tragedies of history are caused not by people being fundamentally good or fundamentally bad, but by people being fundamentally people. There was a knock at the door. She opened it. Has it happened yet? Asked Mr. Young. I'm the father, the husband, whatever, both. Sister Mary had expected the American cultural attaché to look like Blake Carrington or J.R. Ewing. Mr. Young didn't look like any American she'd seen on TV. Except possibly for the avuncular sheriff from the better class of a murder mystery, with an old lady as sleuth, and no car chases unless they're done very slowly. It was something of a disappointment. She didn't think much of his cardigan either. She swallowed her disappointment. Oh, yes, she said. Congratulations. Your lady wife's asleep, poor pet. Mr. Young looked over his shoulder. Twins? He said. He reached for his pipe. He stopped reaching for his pipe. He reached for it again. Twins? No one said anything about twins. Oh, no, said Sister Mary hurriedly. This one's yours. The other one's, someone's else. Just looking after him until Sister Grace gets back. No, she had reiterated, pointing to the adversary, destroyer of kings, angel of the bottomless pit, great beast that is called dragon, prince of this world, father of lies, spawn of Satan, lord of darkness. This one's definitely yours. From the top of his head to the tip of his hoofy woofies, which he hasn't got, she added hastily. Mr. Young peered down. Ah, yes, he said doubtfully. He looks like my side of the family. Present and correct, is he? Oh, yes, said Sister Mary. He's a very normal child. She added, very, very normal. There was a pause. They stared at the sleeping baby. You don't have much of an accent, said Sister Mary. Have you been out here long? About 10 years, said Mr. Young, mildly puzzled. Job moved, you see, and I had to move with it. It must be a very exciting job, I've always thought, said Sister Mary. Mr. Young looked gratified. Not everyone appreciated the more stimulating aspects of cost accountancy. I expect it was very different where you were before, Sister Mary went on. Well, I suppose so, said Mr. Young, who never really thought about it. Lutton, as far as he could remember, was pretty much like Tadfield. The same sort of hedges between your house and the railway station. Same sort of people. Taller buildings, for one thing, said Sister Mary desperately. Mr. Young stared at her. The only one he could think of was the Alliance's and Leicester's offices. I expect you go to a lot of garden parties, said the nun. He was on firmer ground here. Deidre had always been keen on that sort of thing. Lots, he said with feeling. Deidre makes jam for them, you know, and I normally have to help with the white elephant. This was an aspect of Buckingham Palace society that had never occurred to Sister Mary, although the pachyderm fitted right in. I expect they're the tributes, she said. I read that these foreign potentates would give her all sorts of things. I'm sorry. Well, I'm a big fan of the royal family, you know. Oh, so am I, said Mr. Young, leaping gratefully onto the new ice floe of the bewildering stream of consciousness. Yes, you knew where you were with the royals. The proper ones, of course, who pulled their weight in the hand-waving in the bridge-opening department, not the ones who went to discos all night long and were sick over the paparazzi. It's possibly worth mentioning that Mr. Young thought the paparazzi was a kind of Italian linoleum. That's nice, said Sister Mary. I thought you people weren't too keen on them, but with the revolting and throwing of those tea sets into the river. She chattered on, encouraged by the order's instruction that members should always say what was on their minds. Mr. Young was out of his depth, and too tired now to worry about it very much. Religious life probably made people a little odd. He wished Mrs. Young would wake up. Then one of the words of Sister Mary's wittering struck a hopeful chord in his mind. "Would there be any possibility of me being able to have a cup of tea, perhaps?" he ventured. "Oh my," said Sister Mary, her hand flying to her mouth. "Whatever am I thinking of?" Mr. Young made no comment. "I'll see it to it right away," she said. "And are you sure you don't want coffee, though? There's one of those vendable machines on the next floor." "Tea, please," said Mr. Young. "My word, you really have gone native, haven't you?" said Sister Mary gaily, and she bustled out. Mr. Young, left alone with one sleeping wife and 2 sleeping babies, sagged onto a chair. Yes, it must be all that getting up early and kneeling, and so on. Good people, of course, but not entirely compost mentees. He'd seen a Ken Russell film once. There had been nuns in it. There didn't seem to be any of that sort of thing going on, but no smoke without fire, and so on. He sighed. It was then that baby A awoke, settling down to a reasonably good wail. Mr. Young hadn't had to quiet a screaming baby for years. He'd never been much good at it to start with. He'd always respected Sir Winston Churchill, and patting small versions of him on the bottom had always seemed ungracious. "Welcome to the world," he said wearily. "You'll get used to it after a while." The baby shut its mouth and glared at him as if it were a recalcitrant general. Sister Mary chose that moment to come in with the tea. Satanist or not, she also found a plate and arranged some iced biscuits on it. They were the sort you'd only ever get at the bottom of a certain tea-time assortments. Mr. Young's was the same pink as the surgical appliance, and had a snowman picked out on it with white icing. "I don't expect you normally have these," she said. "They're what you call cookies. We call them biscuits." Mr. Young had just opened his mouth to explain that yes, so did he, and so did the people even in Letton, when another run rushed in breathless. She looked at Sister Mary, realizing that Mr. Young had never seen the inside of a pentagram, and confined herself to pointing at baby A and winking. Sister Mary nodded and winked back. The nun wheeled the baby out. As methods of human communication go, a wink is quite versatile. You can say a lot with a wink. For example, the new nun's wink said, "Where the hell have you been? Baby B has been born. We're ready to make a switch, and here's you in the wrong room with the adversary, destroyer of kings, angel of the bottomless pit, great beast that is called dragon, prince of this world, father of lies, spawn of Satan, and lord of darkness, drinking tea. Do you realize I've been nearly shot?" As far as she was concerned, Sister Mary's answering wink meant, "Here's the adversary, destroyer of kings, angel of the bottomless pit, great beast that is called dragon, prince of this world, father of lies, spawn of Satan, lord of darkness, and I can't talk now because there's this outsider here." Whereas Sister Mary, on the other hand, had thought that the orderly's wink was more in lines of, "Well done, Sister Mary, switched over the babies all by yourself. Now indicate to me the superfluous child, and I shall remove it and let you go on with your tea with His Royal Excellency, the American culture." And therefore, her own wink had meant, "Well, there you go, dearie, that's baby B. Now take him away and leave me to chat with His Excellency. I've always wanted to ask him why they have those tall buildings with the mirrors on them." The subtleties of all this were quite lost on Mr. Young, who was extremely embarrassed by all this clandestine affection, and was thinking that Mr. Russell, he knew what he was talking about, and no mistake. Sister Mary's error might have been noticed by the other nun, had she not herself been severely rattled by the Secret Service men in Miss Dowling's room, who kept looking at her with growing unease. This was because they had been trained to react in a certain way to people in long flowing robes and long flowing headdresses, and were currently suffering from a conflict of signals. Humans suffering from a conflict of signals weren't the best people to be holding guns, especially when they've just witnessed a natural childbirth, which definitely looked in an un-American way of bringing new citizens into the world. Also, they heard that there were missiles in the building. Mr. Young stirred. "Have you picked a name for him yet?" said Sister Mary archly. Said Mr. Young. "Oh, no, not really. If it was a girl, it would have been Lucinda after my mother, or Germaine. That was Deidre's choice." "Wormwood's a nice name," said the nun, remembering her classics. "Or Damien. Damien's very popular. I'm going to take a drink. There's a break. Anathema Device. Her mother, who was not a great student of religious matters, happened to read the word one day and thought it was a lovely name for a girl. Was 8.5 years old when she was reading the book under the bedclothes with a torch. Well, that's fine. Yeah, some guys showed up and were like sexually harassing me, but I banned them, so it's okay. Let's see. Other children learned to read on basic primers with colored pictures of apples, balls, cockroaches, and so forth. Not the Device family. Anathema had learned to read from the book. It didn't have any apples or balls in it. It did have a rather good 18th century woodcut of Agnes Nutter being burned at the stake and looking rather cheerful about it. The first word she could recognize was nice. Very few people at the age of 8.5 know that nice also means scrupulously exact, but anathema was one of them. The second word was accurate. The first sentence she had ever read aloud was, I tell ye, thief, I charge you with my words, 4 shall ride, and 4 shall also ride, and 3 shall ride the sky as twixt, and 1 shall ride in flames, and there shall be no stopping them, no fish, no rain, no road, neither devil nor angel, and ye shall be there also, anathema. Anathema liked to read about herself. I must say, so that was written in Middle English, you know, the kind of stuff that you read in like God, why is the word lost to me? Canterbury Tales. And I took a whole class on that, so I can read Middle English. That was like just an aside, though. There were books about which caring parents who read the right Sunday papers could purchase with their children's names printed in as heroine or hero. This was meant to interest the child in the book. In Anathema's case, it wasn't only her in the book. It had been spot on so far, but her parents and her grandparents and everyone back to the 17th century. She was too young and too self-centered at this point to attach any importance to the fact that there was no mention of her children, or indeed any events in her future further away than 11 years' time. When you're 8.5, 11 years is a lifetime, and of course, if you believed in the book, it would be. Yeah, Chaucer style. She was a bright child, with a pale face and black eyes and hair. As a rule, she tended to make people feel uncomfortable, a family trait she had inherited, along with being more psychic than was good for her, from her great-great-great-great-great-grandmother. She was precocious and self-possessed. The only thing about anathema her teachers ever had the nerve to upbraid her for was her spelling, which was not so much appalling as 300 years too late. Terry Pratchett had actually been compared to Chaucer, for a sense of humor focused on the lower classes. Interesting, I didn't know that. Watered down coffee. The nuns took baby A and swapped it with baby B, under the noses of Attache's wife and the Secret Service men. By the cunning expedient of wheeling one baby away, to be weighed, loved, got to do that, it's the law, and wheeling another baby back a little later. The cultural attaché himself, Thaddeus J. Dowling, had been called back to Washington in a hurry a few days earlier, but he had been on the phone to Mrs. Dowling throughout the birth experiencing, helping her with her breathing. It didn't help that he had been talking on the other line to his investment counselor. At one point, he'd been forced to put her on hold for 20 minutes. But that was okay. Having a baby is the single most joyous co-experience that two human beings can share, and he wasn't going to miss a second of it. He got one of the Secret Service men to videotape it for him. Evil in general does not sleep, therefore doesn't see why anyone else should. But Crowley likes to sleep. It was one of the pleasures of the world, especially after a heavy meal. He'd sleep right through most of the 19th century, for example. Not because he needed to, simply because he enjoyed it. Footnote, although he did get up in 1832 to go to the laboratory. One of the pleasures of the world, well, he'd better start really enjoying them now, while there was still time. The Bentley roared through the night, heading east. Of course, he was all in favor of Armageddon, in general terms. If anyone had asked him why he had been spending centuries tinkering in the affairs of mankind, he'd said, "Oh, in order to bring about Armageddon and the triumph of hell." But it was one thing to work to bring about it, and it was quite another for it to actually happen. Crowley had always known that he would be around when the world ended, because he was immortal and wouldn't have any alternative. But he had hoped it would be a long way off. Because he rather liked people. It was a major failing in a demon. Oh, he did his best to make sure their short lives were miserable, because that was his job. Nothing he could think up was half as bad as the stuff they thought up themselves. They seemed to have a talent for it. It was built into the design somehow. They were born into a world that was against them in 1,000 little ways, and then devoted most of their energies to making it worse. Over the years, Crowley had found it increasingly difficult to find anything demonic to do which showed up against the natural background of generalized nastiness. There had been bad times over the past millennium, and when he felt like sending a message back below saying, "Look, we might as well give up night now. We might as well shut down Dis and Pandemonium and everywhere and move up here. There's nothing we can do to them that they don't do to themselves. They do things we've never even thought of, often involving electrodes. They've got what we lack. They've got imagination and electricity, of course." One of them had written in, hadn't he? "Hell is empty and all the devils are here." Crowley had gotten a commendation for the Spanish Inquisition. He had been in Spain then, mainly hanging around cantinas in the nicer parts, and hadn't even known about it until the commendation arrived. He had gone to have a look and had come back and got drunk for a week. The Hieronos Bosk. Some dude. What a weirdo. And just when you'd think they were more malignant than ever hell could be, they could occasionally show more grace than heaven ever dreamed of. Often the same individual was involved. It was this free will thing, of course. It was a bugger. Aziraphale had tried to explain it to him once. The whole point, he said, was that somewhere around 1020, when they first reached their little arrangement, the whole point was that when a human was good or bad, it was because they wanted to be. Whereas people like Crowley, of course himself, were set in their ways from the start. People couldn't become truly holy, he said, unless they also had the opportunity to become definitively wicked. Crowley had thought about this for some time, and around 1023 had said, "Hang on, that only works right if you start everyone off equal, okay? You can't start someone off in a muddy shack in the middle of a war zone and expect them to do as well as someone born in a castle." "Ah," Aziraphale had said, "that's the good bit. The lower you start, the more opportunities you have." Crowley had said, "That's lunatic." "No," said Aziraphale, "it's ineffable." Aziraphale, the enemy, of course, but an enemy for 6,000 years now, which sort of made him a friend. Crowley reached down and picked up the car phone. Being a demon, of course, was supposed to mean that you had no free will, that you couldn't hang around humans for very long without learning a thing or two. Oh, but you couldn't hang around humans without learning a thing or two. Mr. Young had not been too keen on Damien, or Wormwood, or any of Sister Mary Loquacious's other suggestions, which had covered half of hell and most of the golden years of Hollywood. "Well," she said finally with a little hurt, "I don't think there's anything wrong with Errol, or Carrie. Very nice American names, both of them." "I had fancied something more, traditional," explained Mr. Young. We've always gone in for good, simple names in our family." Sister Mary beamed. "That's right. Old names are always the best, if you ask me." "A decent English name, like people had in the Bible," said Mr. Young. "Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John," he said speculatively. Sister Mary winced. "Only they've never struck me as very good Bible names, really," Mr. Young added. "They sound more like cowboys and footballers." "Saul's nice," said Sister Mary, making the best of it. "Well, you don't want something too old-fashioned," said Mr. Young. "Or Cain. Very modern sound, Cain, really," Sister Mary tried. Mr. Young looked doubtful. "Oh, there's always Adam," said Sister Mary. That should be safe enough, she thought. "Adam?" said Mr. Young. It would be nice to think that the Satanist nuns had a surplus baby B, discreetly adopted, and that he grew to be a normal, happy, laughing child, active and exuberant. and after that grew up further to become a normal, fairly contented adult. And perhaps that's what happened. Let your mind dwell on this junior school prize for spelling. On his junior school prize for spelling, his unremarkable, although quite pleasant time at university, his job in the payroll department at Tadfield Norton Building Society, his lovely wife. Possibly you would like to imagine some children in a hobby, restoring vintage motorcycles perhaps, or breeding tropical fish. You don't want to know what could have happened to Baby B. We like your version better anyways. He probably wins prizes for his tropical fish. Sad. Alright, on to the next part. In a small house in Dorking, Surrey, a light on was on in a bedroom window. Newton Pulsifer was 12 and thin and bespectacled, and he should have been in bed hours ago. His mother, though, was convinced of her child's genius and let him stay up past his bedtime to do his experiments. His current experiment was changing a plug on an ancient Bakelite radio his mother had given to him to play with. He sat at what he proudly called his worktop, a battered old table covered in curls of wire, batteries, little light bulbs, and a homemade crystal set that had never worked. He hadn't managed to get the backlight radio working yet either. But then again, he never seemed to be able to get that far. 3 slightly crooked model airplanes hung on cotton cords from his bedroom ceiling. Even a casual observer could have seen that they were made by someone who is both painstaking and very careful, but also no good at making model airplanes. He was hopelessly proud of all of them, even the Spitfire, which he had made a rather mess of the wings. He pushed his glasses back up the bridge of his nose, squinted down at the plug, and put down the screwdriver. He had high hopes for it this time, and had followed all the instructions on plug changing on page 5 of Boy's Own Book of Practical Electronics, including 101 safe and educational things to do with electricity. He had attached the correct colored wires to the correct pins. He had checked that it was the right amperage fuse. He screwed it all back together. So far, no problems. He plugged it into the socket, and he switched the socket on. Every light in the house went out. Newton beamed with pride. He was getting better. Last time he'd done it, he blacked out the whole of Dorking, and a man from Electric had to come over and had a word with his mum. He had a burning and totally unrequited passion for things electrical. They had a computer at school, and half a dozen studious children played on after school doing things with punched cards. When the teacher in charge of the computer had finally acceded to Newton's pleas to be allowed to join them, Newton had only ever got to feed one little card into the machine. It had chewed it up and choked fatally on it. Newton was certain that the future was in computers, and when the future arrived, he'd be ready, in the forefront of new technology. The future had its own ideas on this. It was all in the book. Atom, thought Mr. Young. He tried saying it to see how it sounded. Atom. He stared down at the golden curls of the adversary, destroyer of kings, angel of the bottomless pit, great beast that is called dragon, prince of this world, father of lies, spawn of Satan, and lord of darkness. You know, he concluded after a while, I think he actually looks like an atom. It had not been a dark and stormy night. The dark and stormy night occurred 2 days later, about 4 hours after both Mrs. Dowling and Mr. Young had their respective babies had left the building. It was particularly dark and stormy night, and just after midnight, as the storm reached its height, a bolt of lightning struck the convent of the Chattering Order, setting a fire to the roof of the vestry. No one was badly hurt by the fire, but it went on for some hours, doing a fair amount of damage in the process. The instigator of the fire lurked on a nearby hilltop and watched the blaze. He was tall, thin, and a Duke of Hell. It was the last thing that needed to be done before his return to the nether regions, and he had done it. He could safely leave the rest to Crowley. Hastur went home. Technically, Azraphale was a principality, but people made jokes about it these days. On the whole, neither he nor Crowley would have chosen each other's company, but they were both men, or at least men-shaped creatures of the world, and the arrangement had been worked to their advantage all this time. Besides, you grew accustomed to the only other face that had been around more or less consistently for 6 millennia. The arrangement was very simple, so simple in fact that it really didn't deserve the capital letter. which it got for simply being in existence for so long. It was the sort of sensible arrangement that made many isolated agents working in awkward conditions, a long way from their superiors, reach with their opposite number when they realized that they have more in common with their immediate opponents than their remote allies. It meant a tacit non-interference in certain of each other's activities. It made certain that while neither really won, also neither really lost, and both were able to demonstrate to their masters the great strides they were making against the cunning and well-informed adversary. It meant that Crowley had been allowed to develop Manchester, while Aziraphale had a free hand on the whole of Shropshire. Crowley got Glasgow, Aziraphale got Edinburgh. Neither claimed any responsibility for Milton Keynes, though, but both reported it as a success. Note, for Americans and other aliens, me, I'm an American, Milton Keynes is a new city approximately halfway between London and Birmingham. It was built to be modern, efficient, healthy, and all in all, a pleasant place to live. Many Britons find this amusing. Ooh, thank you for the follow. Zimmertrax 133. That's how I think your name is said. Thank you. Continuing. And then, of course, it seemed even natural that they should, as it were, hold the fort for one another whenever common sense dictated. Both were of angel stock, after all. If one was going to Hull for a quick temptation, it made sense to nip across the city and carry out a standard brief moment of divine ecstasy. It'd get done anyways. Being sensible about it gave everyone more time and cut down on expenses. Aziraphale felt the occasional pang of guilt about this, but centuries of association with humanity was having the same effect on him as it was on Crowley, except the other direction. Besides, the authorities didn't seem to care much who did anything, as long as it was done. Currently, what Aziraphale was doing was standing with Crowley by the duck pond in St. James Park. They were feeding the ducks. The ducks in St. James Parks are so used to being bred by secret agents meeting clandestinely, oh my gosh, that they have developed their own Pavlovian reaction. Put a St. James Park duck in a laboratory cage and show it a picture of two men, one wearing a long coat with a fur collar and the other something somber in a scarf. They'll look up expectantly. Russian cultural attaché black bread is particularly sought after by a more discerning duck, while the head of MI9 soggy hovis with marmite is relished by the connoisseurs. Aziraphale tossed a crust to a scruffy-looking drake, which caught it and sank immediately. The angel turned to Crowley. "Really, my dear," he murmured. "Sorry," said Crowley. "I was forgetting myself." The duck bobbed angrily to the surface. "Of course, we knew something was going on," Aziraphale said. But one somehow imagines this sort of thing happening in America. They go on in for that sort of thing over there. "It might yet do at that," said Crowley gloomily. He gazed thoughtfully across the park to the Bentley, the back wheel of which was industriously clamped. "Oh yes, the American diplomat," said the angel. "Rather showy, one feels. As if Armageddon was some sort of cinematographic show where you sell in as many countries as possible." "Every country," said Crowley. "The earth and all the kingdoms thereof." Aziraphale tossed the last scrap of bread at the ducks, who went off to pester the Bulgarian naval attaché and the furtive-looking man in a Cambridge tie, and carefully disposed of the paper bag in the waste paper bin. He turned and faced Crowley. "We'll win, of course," he said. "You don't want that," said the demon. "Why not, pray?" "Listen," said Crowley desperately. "How many musicians do you think you have on your side, eh? First grade, I mean." Aziraphale looked taken aback. Yeah, stop with these reductive adjectives, Gaiman, or adverbs. Also, when they split a word across a line, I sometimes won't read it right. Like, I did say legend earlier, when it was obviously legend. "Well, I should think," he began. "Two," said Crowley. "Elgar and Liszt. That's all. We've got the rest. Beethoven, Brahms, all the Bachs, Mozart, the lot. Can you imagine an eternity with Elgar?" Aziraphale shut his eyes. "All too easily," he groaned. "That's it then," said Crowley, with a gleam of triumph. He knew Aziraphale's weak spot all right. No more compact discs. No more Albert Hall. No more proms. No more Glindborn. Just celestial harmonies all day long. I feel like Pratchett would make a joke about legend versus legend. Yeah. Ineffable, murmured Aziraphale. Like eggs without salt, you said, which reminds me. No salt, no eggs. No gravlax with dill sauce. No fascinating little restaurants where they know you. No Daily Telegraph crossword. No small antique shops. No bookshops either. No interesting old editions. No. Crowley scraped the bottom of Aziraphale's barrel of interests. Regency silver snuff boxes. But after we win, life will be better, croaked the angel. But it won't be as interesting. Look, you know I'm right. You'd be as happy with a harp as I'd be with a pitchfork. One is a foot, the other is much longer. Yep. You know we don't play harps. And we don't use pitchforks. I was being rhetorical. They stared at one another. Aziraphale spread his elegantly manicured hands. My people are more than happy for it to happen, you know. It's what it's all about, you see. The final great test. Flaming swords, the 4 horsemen, seas of blood, the whole tedious business, he shrugged. And then game over, insert coin, said Crowley. Sometimes I find your methods of expression a little difficult to follow. I like the seas as they are. It doesn't have to happen, you know. You don't have to test everything to destruction just to see if you made it right. Aziraphale shrugged. That's ineffable wisdom for you, I'm afraid. The angel shuddered and pulled his cloak around him. The gray clouds were piling over the city. Let's go somewhere warm, he said. You're asking me, said Crowley glumly. They walked in somber silence for a while. It's not that I disagree with you, said the angel, and they plodded across the grass. It's just I'm not allowed to disobey. You know that. Me too, said Crowley. Aziraphale gave him a sidelong glance. Oh, come now, he said. You're a demon after all. Yeah, but my people are only in favor of disobedience in general terms. It's specific disobedience they come down on heavily. Such as disobedience to themselves? You got it. You'd be amazed. Or perhaps you wouldn't be. How long you think we've got? Crowley waved a hand at the Bentley, which unlocked its doors. The prophecies differ, said Aziraphale, sliding into the passenger seat. Certainly until the end of the century, although we may expect certain phenomena before then. Most of the prophets in the past millennium were more concerned with scansion than accuracy. Crowley pointed to the ignition key. It turned. What? He said. You know, the angel said helpfully, and 3 worlds unto an end shall come, in Tumpty one, or 2 or 3 or whatever. There aren't many good rhymes for 6, so it's probably a good year to be in. And what sort of phenomena? 2-headed calves, signs in the sky, geese flying backwards, showers of fish, that sort of thing. The presence of the Antichrist affects the natural operation of causality. Crowley put the Bentley in gear. Then he remembered something. He snapped his fingers. The wheel clamps disappeared. Let's have lunch, he said. I owe you one from... When was it? Paris, 1793, said Aziraphale. Oh, yes, the Reign of Terror. That was one of yours, was that one of yours or one of ours? Wasn't it yours? Can't recall. It was quite a good restaurant, though. As they drove past the astonished traffic warden, his notebook spontaneously combusted, to Crowley's amazement. I'm certain I didn't mean to do that, he said. Aziraphale blushed. That one was me, he said. I've always thought that your people invented them. Did you? We thought they were yours. Crowley stared at the smoke in the rearview mirror. Come on, he said. Let's do the Ritz. Crowley had not bothered to book. In his world, table reservations were a thing that happened to other people. All right. Aziraphale collected books. If he were totally honest with himself, he would have to have admitted his bookshelf. Oh my gosh. If he were totally honest with himself, he would have to have admitted that his bookshop was simply somewhere to store them. He was not unusual in this. In order to maintain his cover as a typical second-hand bookseller, he used every means short of actual physical violence to prevent customers from making a purchase. Unpleasant, damp smells, glowering looks, erratic opening hours. He was incredibly good at it. He'd been collecting for a long time, and like all collectors, he was specialized. He had more than 60 books of precarious concerning developments in the last handful of centuries of the second millennium. He had a penchant for wild first editions. He had a complete set of the infamous Bibles, individually named for errors in typesetting. These Bibles, including the unrighteous Bible, so called from a printer's error which caused them to proclaim in 1 Corinthians, "Know ye not that the unrighteous shall inherit the kingdom of God?" In the wicked Bible, printer by Barker and Lucas in 1632, which the word "not" was omitted from the seventh commandment, making it "thou shalt commit adultery." There was the Discharge Bible, the Treacle Bible, the Standing Fishes Bible, the Charing Cross Bible, and the rest. Aziraphale had them all. Even the very rarest, a Bible published in 1651 by the London publishing firm of Bilton and Skaggs. It had been the very first of their three great publishing disasters. Yeah. Thou shalt commit adultery. The book was commonly known as the Bugger Alley. This Bible. The lengthy compositor's error, if such may be called, occurs in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 48, verse 5. 2. By the borders of Dan, from the east side to the west side, in the portion for Aphor, and by the border of Aphor, from the east side even unto the west side, a portion of Naphtali, and by the border of Naphtali, from the east side unto the west side, a portion of Manasseh. Bugger Alley, this for a lark. I'm a sick to my heart of typing. Master Bilton, of no gentleman, and Mr. Skaggs no more than tight-fisted Southwark Novifict. I tell you one a day like thief anyone with half an ounce of sense could be out in the sunshine and not stuck here all dyin' the molly old by Our Lady workshop, and then a bunch of symbols. By the border of Ephraim, from the east side even unto the west side, portion of Reuben. It appears that these verses were inserted during the proof stage. In those days it was common practice for printers to hang proof sheets in the wooden beams outside their shops, for the edification of the populace and for some free proofreading. And since the whole print run was subsequently burned away, no one bothered to take up this matter with the nice Mr. A. Aziraphale, who ran the bookshop 2 doors along and was always so helpful with the translations, and whose handwriting was instantly recognizable. Bilton and Skaggs' second great publishing disaster occurred in 1653. By a stroke of rare good fortune, they had obtained one of the famed Lost Quartos, the 3 Shakespeare plays never reused in folio edition, and now totally lost to scholars and playgoers. Only their names have come down to us. Sorry, I realize I skipped a huge chunk of the stuff. Oh well, it's fine. Only their names have come down to us. This one was Shakespeare's earliest play, The Comedy of Robin Hood, or The Forest of Sherwood. The 2 others were The Trapping of the Mouse and The Gold Diggers of 1589. Master Bilton had paid almost 6 guineas for the quarto, and believed he could make nearly twice as much back on the hard-color folio alone. Then he lost it. Bilton and Skaggs' third great publishing disaster was never entirely comprehensible to either of them. Everywhere you looked, the books of prophecy were selling like crazy. The English edition of Nostradamus' Centuries had gone to its 3rd printing, and 5 Nostradamuses, all claiming to be the genuine one, were on triumphant signing tours. The Mother Shipton's collection of prophecies was sprinting out of the shops. Each of the great London publishers, there were 8 of them, had at least one book of prophecy on its list. Every single one of the books was wildly inaccurate, but their air of vague and generalized omnipotence made them immensely popular. They sold in thousands, and in the tens of thousands. "It's a license to print money," said Master Bilton to Master Skaggs, who had already had a few thoughts in that direction, and spent the last years of his life in Newgate Prison when he eventually put them into practice. "The public are crying out for such rubbish. They must straightway print a book of prophecy by some hag." The manuscript arrived at the door the next morning. The author's sense of timing, as always, was exact. Although neither Mr. Bilton nor Master Skaggs really realized it, the manuscript they had been sent was the sole prophetic work in all of human history to consist entirely of completely correct predictions concerning the following 340-odd years, being precise and accurate descriptions of the events that would culminate in Armageddon. It was on the money in every single detail. It was published by Bilton and Scraggs in September 1655, in good time for the Christmas trade. Another masterstroke of publishing genius, because Oliver Cromwell's Puritan Parliament had made Christmas illegal in 1654. It was the first book to be printed in England, to be remaindered. It didn't sell. Not even the copy in the tiny Lancashire shop with local author on a piece of cardboard next to it. The author of the book, one Agnes Nutter, was not surprised by this, but then it would have been taken an awful lot to surprise Agnes Nutter. Anyway, she had not written it for sales, or the royalties, or even for the fame. She had written it for the single gratis copy of the book that an author was entitled to. No one knows what happened to the legions of unsold copies of her book. Certainly none remains in any museums or private collections. Even Aziraphale does not possess a copy, but would go weak in the knees at the thought of actually getting his exquisitely manicured hands on one. In fact, only one copy of Agnes Nutter's prophecies remained in the entire world. It was on a bookshelf about 40 miles away from where Crowley and Aziraphale were enjoying a rather good lunch, and metaphorically it had begun to tick. Sip of coffee. And now it was 3 o'clock. The Antichrist had been on Earth for 15 hours, and one angel, one demon, had been drinking solidly for 3 of them. They sat opposite one another in the back room of Aziraphale's dingy old bookshop in Soho. Most bookshops in Soho have back rooms, and most of the back rooms are filled with rare, or at least very expensive books. But Aziraphale's books didn't have illustrations. They had old brown covers and crackling pages. Occasionally, if he had no alternative, he'd sell one. And occasionally, serious men in dark suits would come calling, suggest very politely that perhaps he'd like to sell the shop itself so that it could be turned into a kind of retail outlet more suited for the area. Sometimes they'd offer cash and large rolls of grubby 50-pound notes, or sometimes while they were talking, other men in dark glasses would wander around the shop, shaking their heads and saying how inflammable paper was. What a fire trap he had here. And Aziraphale would nod and smile and say he'd think about it, and then they'd go away, and then they'd never come back. Just because you're an angel doesn't mean you have to be a fool. The table in front of the two of them was covered with bottles. "The point is," said Crowley, the point is. He tried to focus on Aziraphale. "The point is," he said, and tried to think of a point. "The point I'm trying to make," he said, brightening, "is the dolphins. That's my point." "Kind of fish?" said Aziraphale. No, said Crowley, shaking his finger. "It's a mammal. Your actual mammal. Difference is," Crowley waded through the swamp of his mind and tried to remember the difference. "Difference is they made out of water," volunteered Aziraphale. Crowley's brow furrowed. "Don't think so. Pretty sure that's not it. Something about their young. Whatever." He pulled himself together. The point is their brains." He reached for the bottle. "What about their brains?" said the angel. "Big brains. That's my point. Size of damn big brains. And then there's the whales. Brain City, take it from me. Whole damn seas full of brains." "Kraken," said Aziraphale, staring moodily into his glass. Crowley gave him a long, cool look of someone who had just had a girder dropped in front of his train of thought. "Great big bugger," said Aziraphale. "Sleepeth beneatheth the thunders of upper deep, under loads of huge and unnumbered polypo, bloody great seaweeds, you know, supposed to rise to the surface right at the end, when the sea boils." "Yeah? Fact." "Well, there you are then," said Crowley, sitting back. "Whole sea bubbling. Poor old dolphins. So much seafood gumbo. No one giving a damn. Same with the gorillas." Whoop, they say, sky's gone all red, stars crashing to the ground. What they putting in the bananas these days? And then they make nests, gorillas, said the angel, pouring another drink and managing to hit the glass on the third go. Nah. God's truth. Saw a film. Nests. That's birds, said Crowley. Nests, insisted Aziraphale. Crowley decided not to argue the point. There you are, then, he said. All creatures great and small. Great and small. Lots of them with brains. And then, bazam. But you're part of it, said Aziraphale. You tempt people. You're good at it. Crowley thumped his glass on the table. That's different. They don't have to go and say yes. It's the ineffable bit, right? Your side made it up. You gotta keep testing people, but not to destruction. All right. I don't like it any more than you. But I told you, I can't not do what I'm told. I'm an angel. There's no theaters in heaven, said Crowley, and very few films. Don't you try to tempt me, said Aziraphale wretchedly. I know you old serpent. Just you think about it, said Crowley relentlessly. You know what eternity is? You know what eternity is? I mean, do you know what eternity is? There's this big mountain, see? A mile high at the end of the universe. And once every 1,000 years, there's this little bird. What little bird? Said Aziraphale suspiciously. This little bird I'm talking about. And every 1,000 years. Same bird every 1,000 years? Crowley hesitated. Yeah, he said. Bloody ancient bird, then. Oh, okay. And then every 1,000 years, this bird limps, flies all the way to this mountain and sharpens its beak. Hold on, you can't do that. You're doing here in the end of the universe, there's loads of... Angel waved his hand expansively, as if a little unsteadily. Loads of bugger all, dear boy. But it gets there anyway, Crowley persevered. How? It doesn't matter. You could use a spaceship, said the angel. Crowley subsided a bit. Yeah, he said, if you like. Anyways, this bird... Only if it is the end of the universe we're talking about, said Aziraphale. So it'd have to be one of those spaceships where your descendants are the ones that get out on the other end. You have to tell your descendants, you say. When you get to the mountain, you've got to... He hesitated. What have they got to do? Sharpen its beak on the mountain, said Crowley, and then it flies back, in the spaceship. And after 1,000 years, it goes and does it all again, said Crowley quickly. And then there was a moment of drunken silence. Seems like a lot of effort just to sharpen a beak, mused Aziraphale. Listen, said Crowley urgently. The point is that when the bird has worn the mountain down to nothing, right then... Aziraphale opened his mouth. Crowley just knew he was going to make some point about the relative hardness of beaks in granite mountains, and plunged on quickly. Then you still won't have finished watching The Sound of Music. Aziraphale froze. And you'll enjoy it, Crowley said relentlessly. You really will. My dear boy, you won't have a choice. Listen, heaven has no taste. Now, in not one single sushi restaurant. The look of pain crossed the angel's suddenly very serious face. I can't cope with this while I'm drunk, he said. I'm going to sober up. Me too. They both winced as the alcohol left their bloodstreams and sat up a bit more neatly. Aziraphale straightened his tie. Can't interfere with divine plans, he croaked. Crowley looked speculatively into his glass and then filled it again. What about diabolical ones, he said. Pardon? Well, it's got to be a diabolical plan, hasn't it? We're doing it. My side. Well, it's part of the whole overall divine plan, said Aziraphale. Your side can't do anything without being part of the ineffable divine plan, he added, with a trace of smugness. You wish. No, that's the... Aziraphale snapped his fingers irritably. The thing. What do you call the colorful idiom, the line at the bottom? The bottom line? Yes, that's it. Well, if you're sure, said Crowley. No doubt about it. Crowley looked up slyly. Then you can't be certain, correct me if I'm wrong, can't be certain that thwarting it isn't part of the divine plan, too. I mean, you're supposed to thwart the wiles of the evil one at every turn, aren't you? Aziraphale hesitated. There's that, yes. You can see a while you thwart, am I right? Broadly. Actually, I encourage humans to do the actual thwarting, because of ineffability. You're right, you understand. The dialogue is top notch. I agree. This is fun. Right. So all you've got to do is thwart. Because if I know anything, said Crowley urgently, it's that the birth is just a start. It's the upbringing that's important. It's the influences. Otherwise, the child will never learn to use its powers. He hesitated. At least, not necessarily as intended. Have you read any other Pratchett? I actually have not. I've been meaning to. Like, I've been meaning to read Good Omens. It's like, I have a bunch of books on this mile-long list of things I need to read before I die. And Pratchett is definitely on there. Certainly our side won't mind me thwarting you, said Aziraphale thoughtfully. They won't mind that at all. Right. It'll be a real feather in your wing. Crowley gave the angel an encouraging smile. What will happen to the children if it doesn't get a What will happen to the child if it doesn't get a satanic upbringing, though, said Aziraphale. Probably nothing. It'll never know. But genetics. Don't tell me from genetics what they've got to do with it. What have they got to do with it, said Crowley. Look at Satan. Created as an angel, grows up to be the great adversary. Hey, if you're going to go on about genetics, you might as well say that the kid will grow up to be an angel. After all, his father was really big in heaven in the old days. Saying he'll grow up to be a demon just because his dad became one is like saying a mouse with its tail cut off will give birth to tailless mice. No, upbringing is everything. Take it from me. I would highly recommend it. Hadn't until last year, but I'm kind of obsessed now. About a dozen books in now. He's so damn funny. Like Lord of the Rings meets Monty Python. That sounds actually amazing. I know growing up, I watched a lot of Monty Python. Well, mainly The Holy Grail. That's the one my mom and dad would let me watch. But, oh, that sounds so great. I love funny books. One thing I would say is don't necessarily start with the first book. Noted. Thanks. And without unopposed satanic influences, well, at worst, hell will have to start all over again, and the Earth gets at least another 11 years. That's gotta be worth something, hasn't it? Aziraphale was looking thoughtful again. You're saying the child isn't evil of itself, he said slowly. Potentially evil. Potentially good too, I suppose. Just this hugely powerful potentiality waiting to be shaped, said Crowley. He shrugged. Anyways, we're talking about this good and evil. They're just names for sides. We know that. I suppose it's got to be worth a try, said the angel. Crowley nodded encouragingly. Agreed, said the demon, holding out his hand. The angel shook it, cautiously. It'll certainly be more interesting than saints, he said. It'll be more for the child's own good in the long run, said Crowley. We'll be godfathers of sorts, overseeing his religious upbringing, you might say. Aziraphale beamed. You know, I never thought of it like that, he said. Godfathers. Well, I'll be damned. It's not too bad, said Crowley, when you get used to it. She was known as Scarlet. At that time, she was selling arms. Although it was the beginning to lose its savor. She never stuck at she was known as Scarlet. At that time, she was selling arms. Although it was beginning to lose its savor. She never stuck at one job for very long. 300-400 years at the outside. You didn't want to get caught in a rut. They aren't really in chronological order, but instead a sort of group books with shared characters. Some of the other characters will show up as side characters in other books, but he definitely gets better in the later series. I read Going Postal first, which is like the 37th book in the series. Discworld, his main series. Okay. So I can just pick up any of them. Maybe I can see if I can find really super cheap ones around my local library or something. Her hair was a true auburn, neither ginger nor brown, but a deep and burnished copper color, and it fell to her waist in the tresses that men would kill for, and often had. Her eyes were a startling orange. She looked 25 and always had. She had a dusty brick-red truck full of assorted weaponry, and an almost unbelievable skill in getting it across any border in the world. She had been on her way to a small West African country where a minor civil war was in progress, to make a delivery which would, with any luck, turn it to a major civil war. Unfortunately, the truck had broken down, far beyond her ability to repair it. She was very good with machinery these days. She was in the middle of the city, nominally a city. It was the size of an English country town, or translated into American terms, a shopping mall. The city in question was the capital of Cumberland, an African nation which had been at peace for the last 3,000 years. I would read that first, or Equal Rights, the start of the Witches books, or Guards, the first of the City Watch books. Okay. Oh man, I'm glad I finally added a little chat box, so now all these, suggestions I can actually just go back and find. Ooh. For about 30 years, it was Sir Humphrey Clarkson land, but since the country had absolutely no mineral wealth and a strategic importance of a banana, it was accelerated towards self-government with almost unseemly haste. Cumberland was poor, perhaps, and undoubtedly boring, but peaceful. Its various tribes, who got along with one another quite happily, had long since beaten their swords into plowshares. A fight that had broken out in the city square in 1952 between drunken ox drover and an equally drunken ox thief. People were still talking about it. The witches are so great. Granny Weatherwax and her coven. I do love witches, especially if it's written by Pratchett. I can imagine it'd be really funny. I just love witches as a concept. They're just powerful. Scarlet yawned in the heat. She fanned her head with her broad-brimmed hat, left in the useless truck in the dusty street, and had wandered into a bar. She bought a can of beer, drained it, and then grinned at the barman. "I got a truck needs repairing," she said. "Anyone around I can talk to?" The barman grinned wide and huge and expansively. He had been impressed by the way she drank her beer. "Only Nathan, miss. But Nathan's gone back to Cowunda to see his father-in-law's firm." Scarlet bought another beer. "So this Nathan, any idea when he'll be back?" "Perhaps next week, perhaps 2 weeks' time, dear lady." "Ho, then Nathan, he's a scamp, no?" He leaned forward. "You travel alone, miss?" "Yes." "Could be dangerous. Some funny people on the roads these days. Bad men. Not local boys," he added quickly. Scarlet raised a perfect eyebrow. Despite the heat, he shivered. "Thanks for the warning," Scarlet purred. Her voice sounded like something that lurks in the long grass, visible only by the twitching of its ears until something young and tender wobbles by. She tipped her hat to him and strolled outside. The hot African sun beat down on her. Her truck sat in the street with a cargo of guns and ammunition and landmines. It wasn't going anywhere. Scarlet stared at the truck. The Vulture was sitting on its roof and had traveled 300 miles with Scarlet so far. It was belching quietly. She looked around the street. A couple of women chattered on the street corner. A board market vendor sat in front of a heap of colored gourds, fanning the flies. A few children played lazily in the dust. "What the hell," she said quietly. "I could do with a holiday anyways." That was Wednesday. By Friday, the city was a no-go area. By the following Tuesday, the economy of Kumbola Land was shattered. 20,000 people were dead, including the barman, shot by rebels while storming the market barricades. Almost 100,000 people were injured. All of Scarlet's assorted weapons had fulfilled the function for which they had been created, and the Vulture had died of greasy degeneration. Scarlet was already on their last train out of the country. It was time to move on, she felt. She had been doing arms for too damn long. She wanted to change. Something with openings. She quite fancied herself a newspaper journalist, a possibility. She fanned herself with a hat and crossed her long legs in front of her. Farther down the train, a fight broke out. Scarlet grinned. People were always fighting over her and around her. It was rather sweet, really. Oh, by the way, Pendrak, I don't mind, the interrupting. I don't really think it's interrupting. I don't know. I like the conversation. Sable had black hair, a trim black beard, and he had just decided to go corporate. He did drinks with his accountant. "How we doing, Franny?" he asked her. 12 million copies sold so far. Can you believe that? They were doing drinks in a restaurant called Top of the Sixes, on top of 666 Fifth Avenue, New York. There was something that amused Sable ever so slightly. From the restaurant windows, you could see the whole of New York. At night, the rest of New York could see the huge red 666s that adorned all four sides of the building. Of course, it was just another street number, but if you started counting, you'd be bound to get to it eventually. But you had to smile. Sable and his accountant had just come from a small, expensive, and a particularly exclusive restaurant in Greenwich Village, where the cuisine was entirely nouvelle. A string bean, a pea, and a sliver of chicken breast, aesthetically arranged on a square china plate. Sable had invented it the last time he'd been in Paris. His accountant had polished her meat and 2 veg off in under 50 seconds, and had spent the rest of the meal staring at the plate, the cutlery, and from time to time her fellow diners, in a manner that suggested that she was wondering what they'd taste like, which was in fact the case. It amused Sable enormously. He toyed with his Perrier. 12 million, huh? That's pretty good. That's great. So we're going corporate. It's time to blow the big one, am I right? California, I think. I want factories, restaurants, the whole schmear. We'll keep the publishing arm, but it's time to diversify, yeah? I don't think that's a nice thing. Let's check. Yep, thought so. Well, I don't accept people calling me that, so sorry. Pendrock, I looked it up. He basically called me a bitch. So, not accepting that. Yeah, it's okay. I get a lot of that. Ugh. Also, if you looked at his, user, it was like Shrek with a Hitler mustache, so yikes. Super yikes. Yeah, I saw that and I was like, I think that is not good. And I was pretty sure, and I was right. Blah, blah, blah. It's time to diversify. Freddy nodded. Sounds good, Sable. We'll need... She was interrupted by a skeleton. By the way, thanks, Pendrak, yeah. A skeleton in a Dior dress, with tan skin stretched almost to a snapping point over delicate bones of the skull. The skeleton had long blonde hair and perfectly made-up lips. She looked like the person's mother around the world would point to, muttering, "That's what'll happen to you if you don't eat your greens." She looked like a famine relief poster with style. She was New York's top fashion model, and she was holding a book. She said, excuse me, Mr. Sable. I hope you don't mind me intruding, but your book, it changed my life. I was wondering if you would mind signing it for me." She stared imploringly at him with eyes deep sunk in gloriously eyeshadowed sockets. Sable nodded graciously and took the book from her. It was not surprising that she had recognized him, for his dark gray eyes stared out from his photo on the foil-embossed cover. Foodless dining, slim yourself beautiful. The book was called The Diet Book of the Century. "How do you spell your name?" he asked. "Cheryl, 2 R's, 1 Y, 1 L. "You remind me of an old friend," he told her, as he wrote swiftly and carefully on the title page. "There you go. Glad you liked it. Always good to meet a fan." What he had written was this: "Cheryl, a measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny, and see thou hurt not the oil and wine." Revelation 6:6. Dr. Raven Sable. "That's from the Bible," he told her. She closed the book reverently and backed away from the table, thanking Sable. He didn't know how much this meant to her. He had changed her life. Truly, he had. He'd never actually earned a medical degree. He claimed, since there had never been any universities in those days. But Sable could see that she was starving to death. He gave her a couple months at the outside. Foodless. Handle your weight problem. Terminally. Franny was stabbing her laptop computer hungrily, planning the next phase in Sable's transformation on the eating habits of the Western world. Sable had bought her the machine as a personal present. It was very, very expensive, very powerful, and ultra slim. He liked slim things. There's a European outfit we can buy into for the initial holdings Incorporated. That'll give us the Liechtenstein tax base. Liechtenstein? It's a country. Tax base. Now, if we channel funds out through the Caymans into Luxembourg, and from there to Switzerland, we could pay for the factories in... But Sable was no longer listening. He was remembering an exclusive little restaurant. It occurred to him that he had never seen so many rich people so hungry. Sable grinned, the honest, open grin that goes with the job satisfaction, perfect and pure. He was just killing time until the main event, but he was killing it in such an exquisite ways. Time and sometimes people. Alright, I'm actually going to take a drink of water this time. Over coffee. My huge water bottle. So wet. It's all the condensation. Alright. Sometimes he was called White, or Blanc, or Albus, or Chalky, or Weiss, or Snowy, or any of 100 other names. Thanks, Pendrak. His skin was pale, his hair a faded blonde, his eyes light gray. He was somewhere in his 20s at a casual glance, and a casual glance was all anyone ever gave him. He was almost entirely unmemorable. Unlike his two colleagues, he could never settle down in any one job for very long. Finally cooled down here. Hope it does the same for you guys soon, too. I got a temperature warning on my phone. They were like, it's going to be above 100. Take care of yourself. And I was like, oh, lovely. He had had all manner of interesting jobs in a lot of interesting places. He had worked at Chernobyl Power Station, and at Windscale, and a 3 Mile Island. Always in minor jobs. They weren't very important. He had been a minor but valued member of a number of scientific research establishments. He had helped to design the petrol engine, the plastics, and the ring pull can. He could turn his hand to anything. Nobody really noticed him. He was unobtrusive. His presence was cumulative. If you thought about it carefully, you could figure out that he had to have been doing something, had to have been somewhere. Maybe he even spoke to you. But it was easy to forget that Mr. White. At this time, he was working as a deckhand on an oil tanker heading towards Tokyo. The captain was drunk in his cabin. The first mate was in the head. The second mate was in the galley. That was pretty much it for the crew. The ship was almost completely automated. There wasn't much a person could do. However, if a person had just happened to press the emergency cargo release switch on the bridge, the automatic systems would take care of releasing huge quantities of black sludge into the sea. Millions of tons of crude oil with devastating effects on the birds, fish, vegetation, animals, and humans of the region. Of course, there were dozens of fail-safe interlocks and foolproof safety backups, but what the hell, there always were. Anyway, afterwards, there was a huge amount of argument as to exactly whose fault it was. In the end, it was left unresolved. The blame was apportioned equally. Neither the captain, the first mate, nor the second mate ever worked again. For some reason, nobody gave much of a thought to Seaman White, who was already halfway to Indonesia on a tramp steamer piled high with rusting metal barrels of particularly toxic weed killer. Alright, and on to the next section. And there was another. He was in the square in Cumberland, and he was in the restaurants, and he was in the fish, in the air, and in the barrels of weed killer. He was on the roads, and in the houses, and in places, and in hovels. There was nowhere that he was a stranger, and there was no getting away from him. He was doing what he did best, and what he was doing was what he was. He was not waiting, he was working. Harriet Dowling returned home with her baby, which, on the advice of Sister Faith Prolix, who was more persuasive than Sister Mary, and with telephonic agreement of her husband, she had named Warlock. The cultural attaché returned home a week later and pronounced the baby to the spit of his side of the family. He also had his secretary advertise the lady for a nanny. Crowley had seen Mary Poppins on television one Christmas, Indeed, behind the scenes, Crowley had had a hand in most television, although it was on the invention of the game show that he truly prided himself. Oh, I'm sorry, Pendrak. It sucks when internet, is not working. He toyed with the idea of a hurricane as an effective and incredibly stylish way of disposing of the queue of nannies that would certainly form or possibly stack up in a holding pattern outside the cultural attaché's Regent's Park residence. Happening a lot more lately and starting to get annoying. Haha. I'd be furious. Internet. He contented himself with a wildcat tube strike, and when a day came, only one nanny turned up. She wore a knit tweed suit and discreet pearl earrings. Something about her might have said nanny, but it said it in an undertone of the sort of employed by British butlers and a certain type of American film. It also coughed discreetly and muttered that she could well be the sort of nanny who advertises unspecified but strangely explicit services in certain magazines. Her flat shoes crunched up the graveled drive, and a gray dog padded silently at her side, white flecks of saliva dripping from its jaw. Its eyes glinted scarlet, and it glanced from side to side hungrily. She reached the heavy wooden door, smiled to herself, a brief satisfied flicker, and rang the bell. It donged gloomily. The door was opened by a butler, as they say, of the old school. A night school just got off the Tottenham Court Road, run by an elderly actor who had played butlers and gentlemen in films and television on the stage since the 1920s. I am Nanny Ashtoreth, she said, and this, she continued, while the grey dog at her side eyed the butler carefully, working out, perhaps, where it would bury the bones, is Rover. She left the dog in the garden and passed her interview with flying colors, and Mrs. Dowling led the nanny to see her new charge. She smiled unpleasantly. What a delightful child, she said. He'll be wanting a little tricycle soon. By one of those coincidences, another new member of staff arrived the same afternoon. He was the gardener, and as it turned out, he was amazingly good at his job. No one quite worked out why this should be the case, since he never seemed to pick up a shovel and made no effort to rid the garden of the sudden flocks of birds that filled it, and settled all over him at every opportunity. He just sat in the shade, while around him the residents' gardens bloomed about and bloomed. Warlock used to come down to see him when he was old enough to toddle, and Nanny was doing whatever it was she did on her afternoons off. This here's Brother Slug, the gardener would tell him, and this tiny little critter is Sister Potato Weevil. Remember, Warlock, as you walk your way through the highways and byways of life's rich and fulsome path, to have love and reverence for all living things. Nanny says that living things is fit only to be ground under my heels, Mr. Francis, said the little Warlock, stroking Brother Slug, and then wiping his hand conscientiously on his Kermit the Frog overall. Don't you listen to that woman, Francis would say. You listen to me. At night, Nanny Ashtoreth sang nursery rhymes to Warlock. Oh, the grand old Duke of York had 10,000 men. He marched them up to the top of the hill and crushed all the nations of the world and brought them under the rule of Satan, our master. And this little piggy went to Hades. This little piggy stayed home. This little piggy ate raw and steaming human flesh. And this little piggy violated virgins. And this little piggy clambered over the heap of dead bodies to get to the top. Well, Francis, the gardener, says I must selflessly practice virtue and love all living things, said Warlock. Don't you listen to that man, darling, the nanny would whisper when she tucked him into his little bed. You listen to me. And so it went. The arrangement worked perfectly. A no-score win. Nanny Ashtoreth brought the little kid a little tricycle, but could never persuade him to ride it inside the house. And he was scared of Rover. Oh my god, yeah, the nursery rhymes. Subtle. In the background, Crowley and Aziraphale met on the top of buses and in art galleries, and at concerts, compared notes, and smiled. When Warlock was 6, His nanny left, taking Rover with her. The gardener handed in his resignation on the same day. Neither of them left with quite the same spring in their step with which they had arrived. Warlock now found himself being educated by 2 tutors. Mr. Harrison taught him about Attila the Hun, Vlad Dracula, and the darkness intrinsicate in the human spirit. He avoided mentioning that Attila was nice to his mother, or that Vlad Dracul was punctilious about saying his prayers every day. He tried to teach Warlock how to make rabble-rousing political speeches to sway the hearts and minds of multitudes. Mr. Cortez taught him about Florence Nightingale, except for the bits about syphilis, Abraham Lincoln, and the appreciation of art. He tried to teach him about free will, self-denial, and doing unto others as you would wish them to unto you. They both read the child extensively from the Book of Revelation. Despite their best efforts, Warlock showed a regrettable tendency to be good at math. Oh, sorry. Neither of his tutors was entirely satisfied with his progress. When Warlock was 10, he liked baseball. He liked plastic toys that transformed into other plastic toys, indistinguishable from the first set of plastic toys, except to the trained eye. He liked his stamp collection, and he liked banana-flavored bubblegum. He liked comics and cartoons, and his BMX bike. Crowley was troubled. They were in the cafeteria of the British Museum, another refuge for all the weary foot soldiers of the Cold War. At the table to their left, 2 ramrod-straight Americans in suits were surreptitiously handing over a briefcase full of deniable dollars to a small, dark woman in sunglasses. At the table on their right, deputy head of MI7 and the local KGB section officer argued over who got to keep the receipt for the tea and buns. Crowley finally said that he had not even dared to think over the last decade. If you ask me, Crowley said to his counterpart, he's too bloody normal. Aziraphale popped another deviled egg into his mouth and washed it down with coffee. He dabbed his lips with a paper napkin. It's my glued influence, he beamed. Or rather, credit where credit's due. That's of my little team. Crowley shook his head. I'm taking that into account. Look, by now he should be trying to warp the world around him to his own desires, shaping it in his own image, that kind of stuff. Well, not actually trying. He'll do it without even knowing it. Have you seen any evidence of that happening? Well, no, but by now he should be a powerhouse of raw force. Is he? Well, no, not as far as I've noticed, but he's too normal, said Crowley, drummed his fingers on the table. I don't like it. There's something wrong, and I just can't put my finger on it. Aziraphale helped himself to Crowley's slice of angel cake. Well, he's a growing boy, and, of course, there's been a heavenly influence in his life. Crowley sighed. I just hope he'll know how to cope with the hellhounds and all. Aziraphale raised one eyebrow. Hellhound? On his 11th birthday, I received a message from hell last night. The message had come during The Golden Girls, one of Crowley's favorite television programs. Rose had taken 10 minutes to deliver what could have been quite a brief communication. By the time the non-infernal service was restored, Crowley had quite lost the thread of the plot. They're sending him a hellhound to pat it by his side and guard him from all harm. Biggest one they've got. Won't people remark on the sudden appearance of a huge black dog? His parents for a start. Crowley stood up suddenly, treading on the foot of Bulgarian cultural attaché, who was talking animatedly to the keeper of Her Majesty's antiques. Nobody's going to notice anything out of the ordinary. It's reality, Angel, and a young warlock can do what he wants to that, whether he knows it or not. Yeah, of course Crowley loves the Golden Girls. It's very him. Are you going to be there? Asked the angel nonchalantly. Wouldn't miss it for the world, said Crowley. I do hope there's nothing too wrong with the child. We'll see how he reacts to the dog anyway. That should tell us something. I hope he'll send it back, or be frightened of it. If he does name it, we've lost. He'll have all his powers, and Armageddon is just around the corner. I think, said Aziraphale, sipping his wine, which had just ceased to be slightly vinegary Beaujolais, and had become quite acceptable, but rather surprised, Chateau Lafite, 1875. I think I'll see you there. That's the end of the chapter. wow, that was a lot of fun. I am really enjoying Good Omens. I'm glad that I decided to pick it up. What should I use as a bookmark? I should have like actual bookmarks around my like setup, but I don't. It's 200 pesos. How about that? Just like 200 pesos. All right, so thank you all for joining in. I had an amazing time. I usually only stream reading for about 2 hours. Um, and I have some chores to go do, sadly. I have to go clean my room. I have to go do some other things. Pick up a wrist brace. My wrist has been killing me. Oh, but good news, everybody. Yeah, fun times. Uh, Good news, I'm actually getting a microphone today, so the audio quality will be much improved, and I am so excited about that, because, oof, the in laptop microphone is yikes. Anyways, good luck, Pendrak, on your errands. Good luck to all the other viewers. I see 4 of you here, so 2 other people maybe. I hope everybody has a good day, and I'll see you all on Friday. Bye!